Lily Chen had always been different from the other kids at Riverside Academy. While her classmates arrived in fancy cars driven by their parents, she took 2 buses every morning just to get to school. Her uniform was always clean, but you could tell it had been worn many times before. The blazer was slightly faded, and her shoes, though polished, showed signs of being repaired more than once. Riverside Academy was one of those schools that rich families sent their children to. The hallways were lined with marble and everything seemed to shine under the expensive lighting. For most students, this was normal. For Lily, it felt like walking through a museum every single day. She was there because she was smart. Really smart. Her grades from her old public school had earned her a partial scholarship, but even with that help, her family struggled to pay the remaining fees. Her mom worked double shifts at the local hospital as a cleaning lady, and her dad drove a delivery truck for 12 hours a day. Every penny they earned went toward keeping Lily at this school because they believed education was her ticket to a better life. But being the scholarship kid came with a price that had nothing to do with money. Every day after lunch, Lily would walk past the music room. Through the glass doors she could see it, a beautiful black grand piano that seemed to call out to her. The instrument was massive, taking up almost a quarter of the room. Its surface was so polished that it reflected the light like a mirror. Sometimes, when no one was around, she would stop and stare at it for a few minutes before hurrying to her next class. The truth was, Lily loved music more than anything in the world. At home, tucked away in the corner of her tiny bedroom, sat an old electronic keyboard that her grandmother had given her for her 10th birthday. It had missing keys and some of the sounds didn't work properly anymore, but it was her treasure. Every night after finishing her homework and helping her mom with household chores, she would put on headphones and play. She had taught herself everything she knew. There was no money for piano lessons, no fancy music teachers, no sheet music, books. Instead, she watched free videos online and practiced until her fingers knew exactly where to go. She would close her eyes and let the music flow through her, creating melodies that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her heart. But that old keyboard was nothing like the grand piano in the music room. She had never actually touched a real piano before. Sometimes she wondered what it would feel like, how the keys would respond to her touch, how the sound would fill a room instead of just her headphones. The music room was usually locked during lunch break, but occasionally Mr. Peterson, the music teacher, would leave it open for students who wanted to practice. These were always the kids who could afford private lessons, the ones whose parents bought them expensive instruments and paid for them to attend music camps during summer vacation. Lily knew she didn't belong in that group. She had learned this lesson the hard way during her first week at the school. It had happened in English class. Mrs. Davidson was asking students about their hobbies and interests, trying to get to know the new scholarship students. When she called on Lily, she had innocently mentioned that she loved playing piano. The room had erupted in giggles and whispers. "You play piano?" Victoria Hamilton had asked, turning around in her seat with a smirk on her face. Victoria was everything Lily wasn't: blonde, confident, and from one of the wealthiest families in the city. "That's so cute. Where do you take lessons? At the community center?" The laughter had gotten louder. Lily's face had turned red as she mumbled something about teaching herself. Victoria's friends had exchanged looks and giggled even more. From that day on, Lily had learned to keep her love of music to herself. But still, every day she found herself stopping by that music room, watching, listening, dreaming. One Thursday afternoon, as she was walking past the room, she heard someone playing inside. The melody was beautiful but complex, clearly a classical piece that required years of training to master. She peered through the glass and saw Victoria at the piano, her fingers dancing across the keys with practiced precision. A small crowd of students had gathered outside the room, all watching and whispering about how talented Victoria was. Some of them were recording videos with their phones, probably to post on social media later. Victoria loved being the center of attention, and her piano skills were just another way for her to show off. As Lily watched, she felt a familiar ache in her chest. It wasn't jealousy exactly. It was more like longing. She could see the joy on Victoria's face as she played, the way the music seemed to transport her to another world. Lily knew that feeling because she experienced it every night in her bedroom, with her old keyboard. But this was different. This was real piano music filling a real room with real people listening and appreciating it. This was what Lily dreamed about but knew she would never have. The music stopped, and Victoria stood up to accept the applause from her friends. As the crowd began to disperse, Lily quickly looked away and continued walking down the hallway. She had math class next and she couldn't afford to be late. Teachers at Riverside Academy didn't give scholarship students the same flexibility they gave to other kids. That evening, as she rode the bus home through the city, Lily stared out the window and thought about music, about dreams, about the difference between wanting something and actually being able to have it. Her neighborhood was a world away from the pristine streets around Riverside Academy. Here, the buildings were older, the paint was chipped, and people worked hard just to get by. But it was home, and there was something comforting about the familiar sounds and smells as she walked up the 3 flights of stairs to her family's small apartment. Her mom was already home, exhausted from her long shift at the hospital. She was sitting at their tiny kitchen table going through bills and trying to make the numbers work. It was the same scene Lily saw most evenings. "How was school today, sweetheart?" her mom asked, looking up with tired eyes but still managing a smile. "It was fine," Lily replied, the same answer she gave every day. She never told her parents about the whispers, the looks, or how out of place she felt. They were sacrificing so much to give her this opportunity, and she didn't want them to worry. After dinner, she went to her room and sat down at her old keyboard. She put on her headphones and began to play the same classical piece she had heard Victoria performing earlier. Her fingers found the melody easily. She had practiced it countless times after watching video tutorials online, but as beautiful as the music sounded in her headphones, she couldn't help but wonder what it would sound like on a real piano, what it would feel like to press down on real keys and hear the music fill a room, instead of being confined to her ears alone. As she played, Lily made a quiet promise to herself. Someday, somehow, she would get the chance to play on a real piano. She didn't know when or how, but she knew that music was too big a part of her soul to keep hidden forever. Little did she know that someday was coming much sooner than she expected, and it would change everything. 3 weeks later, everything changed. It was a Friday morning when Principal Morrison's voice crackled through the school's intercom system during first period. "All students and faculty, please report to the main auditorium immediately for a special assembly. Classes are suspended until further notice." Lily gathered her books and followed the stream of students toward the auditorium. The buzz of excitement was impossible to miss. Everyone was curious about what could be so important that it would interrupt regular classes. The auditorium at Riverside Academy was impressive, just like everything else at the school. It could seat over 500 people, with plush red seats arranged in perfect rows facing a large stage. The ceiling was decorated with intricate moldings, and crystal chandeliers hung overhead, casting a warm glow over everything. As students filed, in chattering and speculating about the assembly, Lily found a seat toward the back. She preferred to stay out of sight during school events, especially ones where she might accidentally draw attention to herself. Principal Morrison walked onto the stage, his polished shoes clicking against the wooden floor. He was a tall, stern-looking man who commanded respect just by entering a room. Behind him, several teachers followed, including Mr. Peterson, the music teacher. "Good morning, students and faculty," Principal Morrison began, his voice carrying easily through the large space without needing a microphone. "I've called this assembly to share some exciting news with all of you." The chattering died down as everyone focused on the stage. As you know, Riverside Academy has always prided itself on excellence in all areas: academics, athletics, and the arts. Today, I'm pleased to announce that we will be hosting our annual talent showcase next Friday. This year's theme is Hidden Talents, and we encourage any student who has a special skill or ability to consider participating. A wave of excitement rippled through the auditorium. The talent showcase was always a big event at the school, but this year felt different somehow, more inclusive. To give you an idea of the caliber of performance we're looking for, Principal Morrison continued, we'd like to start today's assembly with a demonstration. Victoria Hamilton, would you please join us on stage? Victoria stood up from her seat. In the front row, her blonde hair perfectly styled and her uniform immaculate as always. She walked confidently toward the stage, waving at her friends who cheered and applauded. Even in a room full of 500 people, Victoria managed to make it seem like the spotlight was naturally hers. Victoria has graciously agreed to perform a piece on our auditorium piano, Principal Morrison announced as he gestured toward the magnificent instrument that sat at the center of the stage. The piano was even more beautiful than the one in the music room. It was a concert grand, its black surface gleaming under the stage lights. Just looking at it made Lily's heart race. This was the kind of instrument that professional musicians played in concert halls around the world. Victoria took her place at the piano bench, adjusted her posture, and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment, the auditorium was completely silent. Then she began to play. The piece was Chopin's Minute Waltz, a challenging classical composition that required both technical skill and musical sensitivity. Victoria's fingers moved across the keys with practiced ease, each note clear and precise. The melody soared through the auditorium, reaching every corner of the large space. Lily found herself leaning forward in her seat, completely captivated. Not by Victoria's performance specifically, but by the sound of the piano itself. The rich, full tones were unlike anything she had ever heard from her little keyboard at home. Each note seemed to have weight and substance, filling the air with pure music. As Victoria played, Lily closed her eyes and imagined herself at that piano. She could feel her fingers on the keys, could sense how they would respond to her touch. In her mind, she was playing one of her own compositions, a piece she had written about hope and dreams and the courage to reach for something beyond your circumstances. The performance ended to thunderous applause. Victoria stood and took a graceful bow, soaking in the admiration of her classmates and teachers. As she walked back to her seat, people patted her on the back and whispered compliments. "Thank you, Victoria, for that wonderful demonstration," Principal Morrison said. "Now I want to encourage all of you to consider sharing your own talents next Friday. Sometimes the most remarkable abilities are found in the most unexpected places." His words seemed to hang in the air as he paused, scanning the auditorium, filled with students. "In fact," he continued, "to further encourage participation, I'd like to invite any student who plays piano to come up and try our auditorium piano right now. Don't worry about being perfect. Today is about discovery and encouragement." Lily's heart began to pound. She looked around the auditorium, expecting to see other students raising their hands. A few did, mostly kids she recognized from the advanced music classes, students whose parents could afford private lessons and expensive instruments. But as the seconds ticked by and no one else volunteered, Principal Morrison tried again. "Come now, surely we have more pianists in our school. Don't be shy, this is a safe space to share your musical interests." The silence stretched on. Lily could feel her hands starting to sweat. Part of her wanted desperately to raise her hand, to walk down to that stage and touch those beautiful keys, but the rational part of her brain was screaming warnings. Remember what happened in English class. Remember how they laughed. Remember your place here. But the piano seemed to be calling to her, just like it had every day when she walked past the music room, and Principal Morrison's words about hidden talents and unexpected places kept echoing in her mind. Before she could stop herself, before she could think about all the reasons why it was a bad idea, Lily's hand slowly rose into the air. The reaction was immediate. Heads turned toward the back of the auditorium. Whispers started spreading through the rows of students. She could hear fragments of conversations. "Is that the scholarship girl? Does she really think she can play piano? This should be interesting." Victoria turned around in her seat, and when she saw Lily with her hand raised, a smirk spread across her face. She leaned over to whisper something to her friends and they all started giggling. "Wonderful," Principal Morrison called out, apparently oblivious to the undercurrent of whispers and giggles. "Please come down to the stage, Miss Chen," Lily said, her voice barely audible. "Lily Chen." Miss Chen, please join us. The walk down the auditorium aisle felt like the longest journey of Lily's life. Every step seemed to echo in the large space, and she could feel hundreds of eyes watching her every move. The whispers grew louder as she got closer to the stage. I can't believe she actually thinks she can play after Victoria's performance, someone said. Her family probably can't even afford a real piano, another voice added. This is going to be embarrassing, came a third comment. But the worst moment came when she was halfway down the aisle. Victoria Hamilton's voice rang out clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. Oh my gosh, this is going to be hilarious. That piano probably cost more than her family's entire apartment. The auditorium erupted in laughter. Not the kind of friendly, encouraging laughter that might greet a nervous performer, but the cruel, mocking laughter of teenagers who had found an easy target. Lily's face burned with embarrassment, and for a moment, she considered turning around and running back to her seat, or better yet, running straight out of the auditorium and never coming back to Riverside Academy. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the memory of all those nights practicing on her old keyboard, dreaming of this exact moment. Maybe it was the thought of her parents working so hard to give her opportunities they never had. Or maybe it was simply the stubborn part of her that refused to let Victoria Hamilton's cruelty win. Whatever it was, Lily kept walking. She climbed the steps to the stage, her legs shaking slightly. Principal Morrison smiled at her encouragingly, but she could see confusion in his eyes. He was probably wondering what he had gotten himself into. Take your time, he said quietly as she approached the piano bench. Just play whatever feels comfortable to you. Lily sat down at the bench and looked out at the sea of faces staring back at her. The laughter had died down, but she could still see smirks and hear whispers. Victoria was leaning forward in her seat, clearly expecting to be entertained by Lily's failure. For a moment, Lily's mind went completely blank. Her hands felt frozen above the keys. The piano that had looked so inviting from far away now seemed massive and intimidating up close. But then she remembered something her grandmother had told her years ago, when she first gave Lily that old keyboard. Music isn't about the instrument, sweetheart. It's about what's in your heart. The most beautiful piano in the world is just a piece of furniture if there's no soul behind the music. Lily closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let her fingers find the keys. The first note that rang out through the auditorium was soft and clear. Then came the second and the third. And suddenly, the whispers began to fade as something unexpected started to happen. Lily wasn't playing Chopin or any classical piece that might compete with Victoria's performance. Instead, she was playing something entirely her. The melody that came from Lily's fingers was like nothing anyone in that auditorium had expected to hear. It started quietly, almost hesitantly, as if the music itself was unsure whether it deserved to exist in such a grand space. But as Lily's confidence grew, so did the power of her composition. The notes began to weave together into something that told a story. Her story. It was the sound of long nights spent practicing on broken keys, of dreams carried on crowded buses, of determination that refused to be crushed by cruel laughter. The piece had no name because Lily had never written it down. It lived only in her heart and in her memory, born from countless hours of playing alone in her tiny bedroom. She had created it during those moments when the world felt too heavy, when the gap between her dreams and her reality seemed impossible to bridge. The music started with a simple melody in the lower registers of the piano, representing struggle and hardship. Each note seemed to carry the weight of her family's sacrifices, her mother's double shifts, her father's long hours driving his delivery truck. But even in these darker tones, there was something beautiful. The kind of beauty that only comes from real experience, from facing life's challenges head-on. As her left hand continued the steady, grounding bass line, Lily's right hand began to add higher notes that danced above the foundation like hope rising from difficulty. These weren't the flashy runs and technical displays that classical pieces often demanded. Instead, they were honest musical phrases that spoke directly to anyone who had ever felt overlooked or underestimated. In the auditorium, something remarkable was happening. The whispers and giggles that had filled the space just moments before were gradually fading away. Students who had been leaning back in their seats with smirks on their faces found themselves sitting up straighter, drawn into the unexpected power of Lily's music. The melody began to build, not with the aggressive intensity of a classical crescendo, but with the kind of emotional weight that comes from lived experience. Lily's fingers found notes that seemed to capture every feeling she had kept hidden during her months at Riverside Academy. The loneliness, the determination, the quiet pride in her own abilities, despite what others thought. Even Victoria Hamilton, who had been expecting to witness an embarrassing disaster, found her smirk beginning to fade. The music washing over the auditorium wasn't the amateur fumbling she had anticipated. It was something else entirely, raw, honest, and surprisingly moving. Teachers in the auditorium exchanged glances of surprise. Mr. Peterson, who had been teaching music at Riverside Academy for over 15 years, leaned forward in his seat with growing amazement. In all his years of working with students from wealthy families who had access to the best private instructors and expensive instruments, he had rarely heard anything quite like this. The music wasn't technically perfect. There were no complex classical techniques, no show-off passages designed to impress an audience. But what it lacked in formal training, it made up for in something much rarer: genuine emotion and natural musical instinct. Principal Morrison, standing at the side of the stage, felt his initial confusion giving way to something approaching awe. He had introduced this impromptu piano session expecting either a few more polished performances from students with formal training, or perhaps some nervous, halting attempts from less experienced players. He hadn't expected to witness what felt like a window into someone's soul. As the piece continued to unfold, Lily's confidence grew stronger. The hesitancy that had marked the opening notes disappeared, replaced by a sense of purpose that seemed to radiate from the piano itself. Her hands moved across the keys with increasing fluidity, not because she was showing off her technical skills, but because the music was demanding to be heard. The melody took on new layers, with harmonies that seemed to appear naturally under her fingers. These weren't harmonies she had learned from any textbook or instruction video. They were the result of countless hours of experimentation on her old keyboard, of discovering what sounded right to her ear rather than what she had been taught was correct. In the middle section of her composition, the music took on a more complex character. Her left hand began playing a syncopated rhythm that gave the piece an unexpected contemporary feel, while her right hand wove melodies that borrowed from different musical traditions: classical, jazz, even hints of the folk songs her grandmother used to sing. This wasn't the kind of music that typically filled the halls of Riverside Academy. It wasn't safe or predictable or designed to impress wealthy parents at a school fundraiser. It was music that came from a different world, a world where art wasn't a luxury hobby but a necessity, a way of making sense of life's challenges and finding beauty in unexpected places. The audience was now completely silent. The usual sounds of fidgeting, whispering, and rustling papers had vanished. Even students who normally couldn't sit still for more than a few minutes found themselves completely absorbed in what they were hearing. Lily could feel the change in the room's energy, but she was too lost in her music to fully process it. For the first time in months, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The embarrassment and shame that had followed her through the halls of Riverside Academy seemed to melt away, replaced by the pure joy of making music on an instrument that could finally do justice to the sounds she heard in her head. The piano itself seemed to be responding to her touch in ways her old keyboard never could. Every subtle change in pressure created a different tone. Every slight adjustment in timing added new expression to the melody. It was like having a conversation with the instrument, each note building on the last to create something that neither she nor the piano could have achieved alone. As the piece moved toward its climax, Lily's composition began to transform from a story of struggle into something more hopeful. The bass line that had started so heavy and earthbound began to lift, supported by harmonies that suggested triumph rather than defeat. But it wasn't a simple, happy ending. It was something more complex and real, acknowledging that challenges don't disappear but that they can be transformed into strength. Her right hand found a melody line that soared above everything else, not with flashy virtuosity, but with emotional honesty. Each note seemed to carry a message. That worth isn't determined by wealth, that talent doesn't require permission, that music belongs to anyone who has the courage to claim it. The final section of her piece was the most powerful yet. Both hands worked together to create a sound that filled every corner of the auditorium. Not through volume, but through emotional intensity. The music spoke of dreams that refuse to be silenced, of determination that grows stronger in the face of doubt, of the quiet victory that comes from staying true to yourself when the world tells you to be someone else. And then, after what felt like both an eternity and an instant, Lily played the final chord. Her hands lifted from the keys and the last notes lingered in the air before gradually fading into silence. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. No one even seemed to breathe. The auditorium was completely, utterly quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. This wasn't the silence of boredom or distraction. This was the silence that follows something extraordinary, when an audience needs a moment to process what they've just experienced. Lily sat at the piano bench, her hands still hovering above, the keys suddenly aware of where she was and what she had just done. The spell of the music was broken and reality came rushing back. She was sitting on a stage in front of 500 people, having just poured her heart out through an instrument she had never played before today. Slowly, she turned to look out at the auditorium, expecting to see the same mocking faces that had greeted her when she first walked down the aisle. But what she saw instead left her speechless. Every face in the audience was looking directly at her, but not with ridicule or amusement. Instead, she saw something she had never expected to see in the eyes of her Riverside Academy classmates: respect. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Lily remained frozen at the piano bench, her heart pounding so loud she was sure everyone in the auditorium could hear it. She had never experienced anything like this before, the complete attention of hundreds of people all focused on her. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the auditorium, came the sound of slow clapping. One person, then another, then several more. The applause started quietly, almost tentatively, as if the audience wasn't quite sure what they had just witnessed. But as more people joined in, the clapping grew stronger and more confident. Soon, the entire auditorium was applauding, and students began to rise from their seats. First a few, then entire rows, until nearly everyone was standing and clapping with genuine enthusiasm. Lily could hardly believe what she was seeing. These were the same students who had laughed at her just minutes before, who had whispered cruel comments as she walked down the aisle. Now they were on their feet, giving her the kind of ovation she had only ever dreamed about. The applause continued. For what felt like several minutes, waves of sound washing over the stage. Some students were shouting "Bravo" and "Amazing." Others were whistling and cheering. The noise was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. From her seat in the front row, Victoria Hamilton sat in stunned silence. The smirk had completely disappeared from her face, replaced by an expression that looked almost like shock. She wasn't clapping, wasn't standing, wasn't doing anything except staring at Lily with wide eyes. For Victoria, what had just happened challenged everything she thought she knew about talent and worth. She had spent years being told she was special, that her classical training and expensive lessons made her the musical star of the school. She had never imagined that someone like Lily, someone without formal training, without wealthy parents, without any of the advantages Victoria took for granted, could create music that was this powerful. Principal Morrison stepped forward, his own face showing amazement. He had to wait for the applause to die down before he could speak, and even then his voice carried a note of wonder that students rarely heard from their usually stern principal. "Miss Chen," he said, his words carrying clearly through the auditorium's sound system. "That was extraordinary. In my 25 years as an educator, I have rarely heard anything quite so moving." More applause erupted at his words. Students who had never paid any attention to Lily before were now looking at her with new eyes. She wasn't just the scholarship girl anymore. She was the girl who had somehow managed to create magic at the piano. "Mr. Peterson," The music teacher was perhaps even more amazed than Principal Morrison. He rose from his seat and walked toward the stage, his expression showing the kind of excitement that comes from discovering something truly unexpected. "Miss Chen," he called out as the applause finally began to fade. "Could I speak with you after the assembly? I think we need to have a conversation about your musical background." Lily nodded, still too overwhelmed to speak. She managed to stand up from the piano bench, her legs feeling shaky beneath her. As she walked across the stage toward the steps, the applause started up again, accompanied by cheers and calls of encouragement. "That was incredible. Where did you learn to play like that? I can't believe we never knew you could do that." The comments came from all directions as Lily made her way back up the aisle toward her seat. But this time, the attention felt completely different. Instead of mocking whispers, she heard genuine admiration. Instead of cruel laughter, she saw smiles of respect and amazement. As she passed Victoria's row, their eyes met for a brief moment. Victoria's expression was complex, part confusion, part embarrassment, and something that might have been the beginning of respect. For the first time since Lily had arrived at Riverside Academy, Victoria Hamilton was at a loss for words. The rest of the assembly passed in a blur. Principal Morrison made some announcements about the upcoming talent showcase, encouraged more students to participate, and dismissed everyone back to their regular classes. But all anyone could talk about was Lily's performance. As students filed out of the auditorium, they continued to approach her with compliments and questions. People who had never spoken to her before suddenly wanted to know everything about her musical background. Where had she learned to play? How long had she been composing? Would she be performing in the talent showcase? The attention was overwhelming, but it was also wonderful in a way Lily had never experienced. For months, she had felt invisible at Riverside Academy, just another scholarship student trying to blend into the background. Now suddenly everyone wanted to know who she was. During lunch that day, something unprecedented happened. Students actually invited Lily to sit with them. Not just one group, but several different tables extended invitations. She ended up sitting with a group of kids she had never really talked to before, all of them eager to hear more about her music. "I had no idea you could play like that," said a girl named Rachel, who was in Lily's chemistry class. "That piece, you played? Did you really write it yourself?" Lily nodded, still feeling somewhat dazed by the day's events. "I've been working on it for a while. I usually just play it at home on my keyboard." "You need to record it," suggested another student. "Seriously, that was better than half the stuff you hear on the radio." The conversation continued throughout lunch, with students asking about her musical influences, her composing process, and whether she planned to pursue music professionally. For the first time since arriving at Riverside Academy, Lily felt like she was being seen for who she really was, not just dismissed because of her family's financial situation. But the most surprising encounter came later that afternoon. Lily was at her locker, gathering her books for her final class of the day when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Excuse me." She turned around to find Victoria Hamilton standing there, looking uncomfortable and uncertain. This was the first time Victoria had ever approached her directly, and Lily wasn't sure what to expect. "I wanted to talk to you about what happened today," Victoria said, her usual confidence nowhere to be seen. "About your performance." Lily braced herself for another cruel comment, another put-down designed to remind her of her place in the school's social hierarchy. But what came next surprised her completely. "I owe you an apology," Victoria continued, her voice much quieter than usual. "What I said before you played about your family and everything, that was wrong. I was being cruel and I'm sorry." Lily stared at her, hardly able to believe what she was hearing. Victoria Hamilton, the girl who had made her life miserable, for months was actually apologizing. "I've been playing piano since I was 5, Victoria went on, seeming to struggle with each word. "I've had the best teachers, the most expensive instruments, every advantage my parents could buy. But what you did today? I've never played anything that moved people like that." She paused, looking down at her hands. "I guess I was threatened by you, even before today. You're so smart and you work so hard and you never complain about anything even though even though things are harder for you than they are for most of us." The honesty in Victoria's voice was unmistakable. This wasn't a performance or a manipulation. It was a genuine acknowledgement of something she had probably never admitted to herself before. "When you played today, I realized something," Victoria continued. "All my fancy lessons and expensive piano can't buy what you have. You have real talent, real passion." And I was jealous of that. Lily didn't know what to say. She had imagined this conversation so many times, but never like this. In her fantasies, if Victoria ever acknowledged her musical abilities, it would be grudging and resentful. She had never imagined genuine humility or real respect. "Thank you," Lily finally managed to say. That means a lot." "I was wondering," Victoria said, her voice becoming even more tentative, "if maybe you'd want to play together sometime. I mean, if you're interested. We could work on something for the talent showcase, maybe. A duet or something." The offer hung in the air between them. Just that morning, Lily would have considered it impossible that Victoria Hamilton would ever want to collaborate with her on anything. Now, suddenly, it seemed like the most natural thing in the world. "I'd like that," Lily said, and meant it. As Victoria walked away, Lily stood at her locker for a moment, trying to process everything that had happened. In the space of a single afternoon, her entire experience at Riverside Academy had been transformed. She was no longer the invisible scholarship girl hiding in the shadows. She was a musician, an artist, someone whose talents deserved to be heard and respected. But perhaps most importantly, she had learned something about herself that she hadn't fully understood before. She had always known she loved music, but today, she had discovered that her music had the power to move people, to change minds, to bridge the gaps between different worlds. That evening, as she rode the bus home through the familiar streets of her neighborhood, Lily felt different. The same buildings, the same sounds, the same smells surrounded her, but she carried herself with a new sense of confidence. She had found her voice, and she had used it to claim her place in a world that had tried to tell her she didn't belong. The week following Lily's performance passed like a dream. Suddenly, walking through the halls of Riverside Academy felt completely different. Students who had never acknowledged her existence before now smiled and waved when they saw her. Teachers looked at her with new interest and respect. Even the cafeteria staff, who knew she was on the reduced-price lunch program, started treating her with the same warmth they showed to all the other students. But the most significant change came from Mr. Peterson, the music teacher. True to his word, he had pulled Lily aside after the assembly to talk about her musical background. When she explained that she was entirely self-taught, that she had learned everything from online videos and countless hours of practice on her grandmother's old keyboard, his amazement had been genuine and profound. "Miss Chen," he had said, shaking his head in wonder, "what you accomplished today shouldn't be possible. The musical instincts you displayed, the emotional maturity of your composition, these are things that usually take years of formal training to develop." That conversation had led to an offer that changed everything. "I'd like to propose something," Mr. Peterson had continued. "I want to offer you private piano lessons, completely free of charge. I also want to recommend you for our advanced music program, and I think we should explore scholarship opportunities for music camps and competitions." Lily had been so overwhelmed that she could barely respond. The idea that someone believed in her talent enough to invest their own time and energy in developing it was almost too wonderful to believe. But Mr. Peterson wasn't finished. "There's something else," he had said. "Every year, our school sends one student to compete in the regional young musicians competition. The winner receives a full scholarship to the prestigious Harmony Arts Conservatory. I think you should be our representative this year." The conservatory was something Lily had only dreamed about. It was where serious musicians went to develop their talents, where careers in music began. She had never imagined it could be within her reach. Now, a week later, she was sitting in the music room during lunch break, having her first official piano lesson with Mr. Peterson. But this wasn't like the lessons that wealthy students received, where they were taught to mechanically execute pieces written by others. Instead, Mr. Peterson was helping Lily understand the technical aspects of what she was already doing naturally. He showed her how to notate her compositions so they could be preserved and shared. He taught her about music theory that explained why certain combinations of notes sounded so beautiful to her ear. Most importantly, he encouraged her to keep developing her own unique musical voice rather than trying to sound like everyone else. Your gift isn't just that you can play piano, he explained as they worked together. It's that you can communicate emotions through music in a way that touches people's hearts. That's something that can't be taught. It's something you're born with. The talent showcase was now just 2 days away, and Lily had decided to perform again. This time she was prepared and confident, knowing exactly what she wanted to share with her audience. She had also been working with Victoria Hamilton on a duet, something that still amazed everyone who knew about it. The collaboration had started awkwardly, two girls from completely different worlds trying to find common ground through music. But as they worked together, something beautiful had emerged. Victoria had suggested they arrange a classical piece for 4 hands, but Lily had a different idea. What if they created something entirely new? A piece that blended Victoria's classical training with Lily's more contemporary emotional style. The result was a composition unlike anything either of them had created before. Victoria's precise, technical skills provided a solid foundation that allowed Lily's more experimental melodies to soar. And Lily's emotional honesty had inspired Victoria to play with more feeling than she ever had before. I never realized how mechanical my playing had become, Victoria had admitted during one of their practice sessions. I was so focused on playing everything perfectly that I forgot music is supposed to make people feel something. Their friendship had developed slowly but genuinely. Victoria had begun to understand the challenges that Lily faced as a scholarship student, while Lily had come to see that Victoria's privileged background came with its own pressures and expectations. My parents have been planning my musical career since I was 5, Victoria had confided. They've spent thousands of dollars on lessons and instruments, and they expect me to become a professional musician, whether I want to or not. Sometimes, I wonder if I even like music anymore, or if I just do it because it's what's expected of me. It was a perspective that Lily had never considered before. She had always assumed that having every advantage would make life easier, but she was beginning to understand that pressure could be just as limiting as lack of resources. The day of the talent showcase arrived with an energy that filled the entire school. Students who had never shown interest in the arts before were excited to see what their classmates could do. The auditorium was packed not just with students but with parents, teachers, and even some members of the local community who had heard about the previous week's surprising discovery. Backstage, Lily felt nervous but ready. She was wearing a simple black dress that her mother had borrowed from a friend. Nothing fancy but clean and appropriate for the occasion. Her hair was neatly pulled back, and she carried herself with a confidence that would have been unimaginable just 2 weeks earlier. "You ready for this?" Victoria asked as they stood in the wings waiting for their turn to perform. "I think so," Lily replied. "Are you?" Victoria smiled, and it was genuine rather than the practiced smile she usually wore. "With you? I'm ready for anything." They weren't the only impressive acts that evening. A senior named David performed a jazz saxophone solo that brought the house down. A group of sophomore girls had created an amazing vocal harmony arrangement. A quiet boy from Lily's math class turned out to be an incredible beatboxer who had everyone dancing in their seats. But when Principal Morrison announced that Lily Chen and Victoria Hamilton would be performing an original duet composition, the auditorium fell silent with anticipation. They walked onto the stage together, and Lily felt that familiar rush of nerves and excitement. But this time was different. She wasn't alone, and she wasn't trying to prove herself to people who didn't believe in her. She was sharing something beautiful with an audience that was ready to listen and appreciate it. They took their places at the piano bench, Victoria on the left, Lily on the right. For a moment they looked at each other and nodded. Then they began to play. The piece they had created together was everything their individual styles had promised it could be. Victoria's parts provided structure and classical beauty, while Lily's contributions added soul and contemporary edge. But the magic happened in the moments where their parts intertwined, creating harmonies that neither could have achieved alone. The audience was captivated from the first note. This wasn't just a performance. It was a conversation between two pianists who had found a way to communicate across the differences in their backgrounds and experiences. The music told the story of their unlikely friendship, of the way art could bring people together in unexpected ways. As the piece built to its climax, Lily and Victoria's hands occasionally crossed over each other on the keyboard, requiring perfect coordination and trust. The visual was as striking as the audio, two girls from different worlds working in perfect harmony to create something beautiful. The final notes rang out through the auditorium, and the silence that followed was even more profound than what had greeted Lily's solo performance the week before. Then the applause erupted, louder and longer than anything heard that evening. But the most meaningful moment came after they had taken their bows and were walking off the stage. Principal Morrison stepped forward with a special announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I've just been informed that there was a very special guest in our audience tonight. Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, the Director of Admissions for Harmony Arts Conservatory, heard about Miss Chen's remarkable talent and came to see for herself what all the excitement was about." A distinguished woman in her 50s rose from her seat in the front row and walked onto the stage. Lily's heart began to race. This was the person who could change her entire future. "Miss Chen," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium, "I came here tonight expecting to hear a talented student pianist. What I witnessed instead was something much rarer, a true musical artist with an authentic voice and the ability to move an audience." She paused, looking directly at Lily with eyes that seemed to see straight into her soul. "On behalf of Harmony Arts Conservatory, I am pleased to offer you a full scholarship to our 4-year program, with additional support for living expenses and instruments. We believe you have the potential not just to become an excellent musician, but to become someone who shapes the future of music itself." The auditorium erupted again, but Lily barely heard it. The scholarship meant everything, not just the education and training she could receive, but the validation that her dreams were real and achievable.